Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode one of Builder Chats, where we talk with builders, engineers, and software developers about open source projects or any kind of cool tech projects that they're working with or that just excite their fancy. So today we're talking with Dylan Kendal. He's a senior software engineer developer on our team. Welcome, Dylan. How you doing?
Thanks for having me. Doing well. I'm in a new town, so I transitioned onto co-working Wi-Fi. Slightly better than my Airbnb, so hopefully it'll be consistent throughout.
Cool. Where are you at right now?
I'm currently in Victoria, British Columbia. We were in Vancouver yesterday, and I'm usually stationed in Montreal, Quebec.
Nice. Where are you originally from? Are you from Montreal?
I'm not. I moved there 5 years ago ish for a job. I was at Shopify for a couple of years, but before that, I was actually out here. I was in Victoria for about 5 years. So I did a digital consultancy here, as well as I went to the University of Victoria out here.
Cool. I guess did you do like computer science as your major? Can you hear me? Testing one, two, three. No.
All right,
Dylan,
I
did
can
we
hear you.
lose him?
Yeah, I can hear you. How much did you get? You're still
Nothing.
Okay.
The foibles of remote work.
Yeah, for sure. Do you want me
I was
to
just
go from the
asking.
top?
Did you? What would you say? Sorry, I'll stop
Do you want
cutting
me to
you
go
off.
from the top?
No, I got most of it. I was just asking. Did you major in computer science?
Oh, okay. Yeah, my education was a little bit messy. I originally did a comp sci degree at UBC Okanagan, which is like a satellite school based out of Kelowna, which is like interior BC. I dropped out within the first year, worked in the mall for a while, realized that I didn't want this to be my life, working retail. So I did like a two-year diploma program in Kelowna at a technical college, and I transitioned into UVic and got most of my bachelor's in computer science, and then ran out of money. So I'm two courses short of a full degree.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's a great journey. I feel like I've so many of the people that I've met in tech industry who I've ended up becoming friends with. They have kind of non-traditional. I have a non-traditional background myself, so I think I resonate with that. I did like was doing my PhD in medieval history, and then I dropped out of that, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do web development now. So, well, we could probably talk all day about our backgrounds, but I wanted to ask you about. You're really excited about this project, Earthly, that you've been working with. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Earthly?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I've poked around a lot with various build tools and various tools and that whole ecosystem. Lately, I've been using Earthly, which I've been having a lot of pleasure with. It's a tool for creating reproducible builds. Under the hood, it's mostly just using Docker or whatever sort of OCI compliant container architecture, and like take everything I say with a grain of salt. I'm a user, not someone that contributes to Earthly, so I don't know how all the internals work. But I mean, the kind of the elevator pitch for Earthly is that it's like Docker, but they handle some of the annoying parts with trying to like actually use Docker for development. Because Docker, like all of these tools, are really intended for creating your end product, your container you're going to ship to someone else. But kind of the intermediate steps of, especially if anyone's familiar with writing Docker files and that whole build process, creating like multi-stage builds can be a bit annoying within Docker, especially if you want to deal with anything with like the local file system for volumes. It can be very challenging to pull stuff out of a Docker container. And I'll probably mix up my usage of container and image as I talk, so you'll have to forgive me for that. But pulling stuff out of it and then dealing with the local file system, putting stuff back in can be really challenging. So Earthly largely just builds on a superset of functionality that's already offered by Docker, but then the elements of publishing to a Docker registry, be it Google Container Registry or something similar. It's really simple. Producing tagged images, you can do that programmatically directly within your kind of recipe file or your equivalent to a Docker file. Stuff like saving to the local file system is really easy. And you can even use it to, it's kind of a task runner. You can use it to just run commands directly on the host operating system. So it makes it really easy to kind of put everything all under the same hood. They do bill it as like a combination of Make and Docker. I think it's maybe not super representative of its actual capabilities. I think there's a lot of stuff that you'd probably still use Make for that this doesn't really handle, but certainly the aspect of having like this concept of build targets is something that it supports and supports really well.
Yeah, so I threw up on the screen the Earthly's website, and I'm just looking at this for like the second or third time, and definitely I see a lot of syntax here that looks kind of like a combination of make build targets and Docker syntax. So I could see the influence for sure.
Yeah, exactly. It looks very familiar to anyone that's come across, like I said, a Docker file or some aspects of Make, certainly.
So you were saying that, like, it sounds like one of the major pain points that something like Earthly is solving is, you said, like, getting data to and out of the Docker, out of the container, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, especially for anyone that's like getting started with Earthly, I think that's probably one of like the initial pitches for it, of this very common task that you have if you're using Docker as part of a larger build system that can be very tedious to deal with. I mean, I don't ever remember all the different options for, say, Docker volume mounts, or now it's volumes and then also different like bind types. So a lot of that is just kind of handled for you, especially if it's part of like interleaving that sort of operations as part of a larger build system or more complex build tool chain. That's the sort of thing that you will get an immediate benefit out of Earthly. So you could do things, as an example, in the work that I'm doing right now, we have some like submodules, Git submodules, or you can just, doesn't have to be specifically that, but it's we have other projects that are hosted on other GitHub repositories, and they have their own build requirements. Most notably, one of the projects, Quick, uses Rust as part of its toolchain, and then it uses a different node version than the rest of like some of the APIs I'm developing or deploying. So, I mean, naturally, Docker is really useful for that, in that you can have these isolated builds, which is kind of table stakes for any sort of repeatable build tool that you would be evaluating. Tools like Bazel and other things in that realm offer similar guarantees, but I can do that. And especially if I'm trying to create this tool for someone that isn't necessarily going to be using Earthly day to day, I can have this as one of the steps where you run Earthly. It'll build these dependent projects in their own isolated environments, and then it'll copy the build artifacts, say like the distributable directory of these node modules, copy them into the local file system, and then you're good to go. You don't really have to interact with Earthly if you don't want to at this point, if the only thing you wanted was like the end artifacts or the end build result. So it's really nice for that sort of like mixed environment. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I like overall. I'm kind of hinting at what I like about Earthly is that it doesn't really care about how you want to do things. You can reuse a lot of your existing knowledge. A lot of your existing build scripts will continue to function. If anything, it just makes you think a little bit more about what you need set up in order for these things to be able to function, much like any other Docker file.
So, by the way, for people who are watching and have seen for like the past minute on screen, this GitHub page, this is for Quick. This is one of Builder's other open source projects that that Dylan was just talking about, that he was integrating their builds, Quick's build steps into Earthly. I'm just kind of curious. So like, what would the interface be like? Is it like this build.basel file that it kind of kicks that off separately?
So you could do that in theory. You could pull down a Docker image or create your own Docker image that is going to pull in Bazel. Just for clarity, I'm not doing that. I'm circumventing whatever build steps are established within this Bazel system. I'm doing something entirely different, but it's not merged yet. But you could have actually, I might have merged it at some point, but you could have like an Earth file that's within this repository or any other GitHub repository. And one of the really cool things with Earthly is that you don't actually need the dependent projects that you want to build. Much like, if I was depending on this, I could actually just say from github.com/builder.io quick, and then it might have a number of like build artifacts that are listed as an outcome of that build process, but it will handle pulling it down, reading the recipe from the Earth file, building it without me having to set it up locally. You can have these like remote targets, if you will, and it can understand these, which is really useful. Especially one of the really nice things with this too is, I mentioned before, you can, as part of the programmatic steps in these recipe files, these Earth files, you can include the step to save the image, like the Docker image, as the final step of any of these build targets. And you can also specify where these build targets are going to be uploaded to. So you could use a Docker registry on Docker Hub or a GitHub or on Google Artifact Registry. And when you do that, it'll keep that information for the entirety of the build step. So if I were to depend on Quick or another project that uses Earthly, when I build it in my dependent project, it will pull that down, the latest image, and use that for caching purposes. So you get this like really powerful shared caching mechanism across repositories and packages, and you can leverage that both in CI and in the deployment environment, as well as for developers, you get to use that locally.
That sounds freaking sweet.
Really nice.
I'm kind of wondering, like, do you have an Earth file that we can take a look at that you've made?
Sure.
Just tell me the URL, or if you want, you can share on your computer, whichever you prefer.
I can quickly try and get this set up here.
Stop sharing.
Okay, let's see if I can share my screen here. Hopefully I don't share anything private.
The danger of live streaming.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, there goes all your bank account details.
Uh-oh. Yeah. It is not detecting my terminal window for some reason as something that I'm available to share. Actually, I think it might have figured out what the restriction is. Just bear with me for one moment.
Sure. I've always dallied in like stuff with build tools, but I've never gone this hardcore, probably because my job never depended on it. I always messed around with I like messing around with Vagrant or we have the command line Nix as well, but which I want to talk about later. But let's look at this Earth file first. So this is like the config file, right? It's like the equivalent of a Docker file, but it's for Earthly's build system. Yeah.
Yeah, it's your equivalent to a Docker file, or any other. It's the build script effectively. So in here, I've got everything folded down just because there's a lot in here, and this is all very messy. It's very much a work in progress, but this is the Earth file that I've been working on for building and deploying our APIs. So if I can remember how this is structured, the thing that I eventually want to run here, I'll kind of run you through maybe how I build Quick or Mitosis, some of our dependent projects, as far as like the API deployment process. Does that make sense? Should I do that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So,
and before we do that, can you also make sure that you introduce the these projects what they are for our viewers?
For sure. Yeah. So Quick is our next generation templating and server-side rendering framework. I'm probably not the best person to give the elevator pitch for it, but it's being developed by Mishko of Angular One fame. He came to us from Google, and he's currently acting as our CTO. So that's his baby, that's his project. There's lots of other talented people like Builder that are working on it as well, but that is very much a work in progress project that we are investing a lot of effort into, and that's kind of like our big project for a solution for really performance server-side rendering as well as like client-side templating. So you can think of it like your Next.js or plus React or what have you. I'm not the best person to give the elevator pitch for it. And then Mitosis is our rendering layer for taking JSX-like or JSX compatible templates and creating client templates or equivalent view layer code for any other front end. So you can have a JSX template, which is mostly like a React JSX file. It has similar lifecycle hooks. It has HTML in JS, that sort of thing. You run it through the toolchain, and then it'll give you whatever your end product is that you've specified as a target. So you could generate straight HTML. You could generate Vue code. You could generate Angular code, Svelte, React. You can even use it to generate Builder compatible like page content. Our CLR is format for our pages. So that's actually something that I've used it a lot in the past last year to build out some of these templates for various like e-commerce integrations. So I would write the JSX, and then I have it spit out a serialized Builder page, and then I upload that into Builder, and then you can do whatever else you want from there. Yeah.
Awesome.
So internally, our APIs use both those projects. So I have to use Earthly to build both of them naturally.
All right. Well, show us the magic. How do you build it?
Sure. So, we can start here. This one's, fits on screen, so it's a nice starting step. And it kind of hides a lot of the nastiness. So really all you need to know for how our internal repository functions is that it's a monorepo. So there's multiple packages within it. Some of those packages are hosted in different repositories, and they're linked in as Git submodules. So I think the current nomenclature for what's cool and hip on the internet for JavaScript, people have taken to call it this like a poly repo or something. But it's a repository that has multiple projects in it. That's all you really need to know. And cool. Most notably in this project, API is one of them. So here I've done something in the past. So this from instruction, much like Docker, you could say from node 14, from node latest, whatever it is, it's going to by default pull from Docker Hub. You can configure it to pull from other registries as well. But you'll see this a lot in early files. You'll see a target like prepare API, which you can see listed above is another step. It'll be prepended by a plus operator. So that's saying that this is a target that is already specified within an earth file. So
basically it's going to like build that target. Like the target is just a list of steps essentially to execute, right? And with an output. Yeah. So it's going to do those steps. It's going to take that output, and then that output is now going to be the new input for this build API a target, right?
Yeah, exactly. And because it's Docker and it's like a Docker file, every instruction will be cached independently. So that build API, much like you can see here on line 209, it could have a save image instruction where like the final result is being uploaded somewhere. And so if I was running this locally and this is checked in as part of a continuous integration process where this is pushing up a new image for each target on merge into the mainline trunk of the repository. I could say use the inline caches, and then it would pull all the images that have been registered. And by register, I mean on 209, like there's a name that's been specified for what this image should be. So you can see it kind of uses the environment variable in line 207. It says US Central 1 Docker package dev, so on, etc. API latest. So it can see that line. It'll do pre-processing. It'll say, okay, well, I know that this step is going to result in an image. So to figure out how, if there's a cache that I can leverage, it'll say, is there an image that's going to be produced by this? Okay, I do know what it is. Go fetch that first. This is optional. Download it, and then use that to pre-populate the Docker cache. And then when I run this, in fact, I can probably do that here. So if I do Earthly build API, you saw before that there's that deps or dependency API step, and you'll it's running through all these different steps. You can see this. The logging is prepended on the left-hand side for the other dependencies or other steps that had preceded it, and some of these steps were already cached, either locally or had I said use the inline caches, it would have fetched it from the mainline trunk and used those for the caches as well. So
I just love a good text interface, by the way. This is really slick.
Nice and colorful, lots of information. It breaks down into separate steps. And so in fact here, because there's that save step, it's informing me that push has been disabled. So if I want to push this up to the registry, that I need to prepend the earthly call or postpend the earthly call with earthly push. So some of these like quote unquote destructive steps, like pushing to a public registry or private registry or something like that, it will not do automatically. And what's really cool, and this kind of leads into a lot of the stuff that I like about Earthly is, again, it's not really like, it doesn't have a strong opinion about how you should be doing things, because I think the stance that maybe the development team has taken is like, you need incremental adoption. And so you're going to have steps outside of Earthly that aren't super clean, that don't fully fit with the way that they want you to do things. So if I go back to my file, if I, it's great if I'm producing an image. If I have a system where I'm deploying this to like Cloud Run or like a Kubernetes instance or something like that, that wants my image, that's looking for it. But if I don't have that luxury and I have to like rsync these contents up to a AWS S3 bucket, what's going to be pulled by something else, but I need to inform the system that like, hey, this step needs to be run as part of the deployment process, and it needs to be run like every time. Don't cache it, please. I can, instead of doing something like save image, I could say run, and then I do whatever it was, whatever it is, like rsync, but I can say -- push. And now this is informing, hey, this is a destructive operation, or this is something that's part of the deployment process, and don't do this by default. Don't cache this. And then if I use the push step, especially in like a CI recipe, if I was doing this in GitHub Actions, I can say run this command with push, and now it'll do it. And I don't have to have like a whole separate step just for the deployment process, in addition to this, which other developers can run locally.
I love that flexibility, and I really like the syntax of how you can add these like pseudo like flags, like -- push right off of the run, and it's not like you have to create some weird wrapper script to like, I don't know, like, oh, rsync it, but not under certain circumstances. It's
Not
like
actually,
you can, you can incrementally add that functionality, even though the tool that's being run is external. That's super cool.
Yeah, it's really neat. And kind of in that same vein, as I mentioned before, if you had a situation where not everyone is running this sort of setup, or they don't want to have to use Earthly, they don't want to replace all of their task runners like Yarn Run, whatever, with Earthly, if they don't want to have to deal with that, you can still do something like I have set up here, where there is a step that needs to be done in this containerized environment because it needs to be done in this clean room, because it depends on certain dependencies. As I mentioned, a project like Quick, where this project depends on node 14, Quick is depending on node 16, and it needs Rust, and it needs certain libraries installed, certain headers, and you don't want to go through that whole process of verifying that those things are installed on the host operating system. It's much easier just to say, here's the programmatic steps in this Docker file, and then extract the contents out, especially for an interpreted language like JavaScript, where all I really care about is the end result, the JS files or the TypeScript definition files. I can do something like this, where I have this instruction here, where they have the special instruction locally. So now this is going to run on the local host operating system, and everything below is just going to be a command that runs locally. So here, if I said I want to provide an instruction for building the API, I say locally, do this step, and we'll take a look what that does, and then run this actual Yarn script on the host operating system. And then if I go up the chain here, I can do this where I say build this target, and then you can see this copy instruction, because this is it's instructing that this can be a local operation. It'll take the artifact from here, this dist dev, and it'll copy it into the local host operating system. And so if I look here, it's going to be somewhere under here. You know, I probably can't type under pressure, but like these files were generated from within Earthly and then copied into my local environment. And this, as you saw, the save image instruction, which is a really nice thing that Earthly provides, that is a bit tedious, that you either have to create a wrapper script or do manually within Docker. They have a similar thing with this save artifact. So this is running within an Alpine container. It's going to do a bunch of stuff, and then I'm just saying within the image, take this directory and then save it as an artifact. So it's going to make it available for other images to copy out, or the local host operating system. And then it makes it really easy just to share build outputs between these different containers of the host operating system.
That's super cool. I love that. I'm kind of wondering if we could shift gears back to something I'd mentioned earlier. You know, I said my own totally like insignificant experience with Vagrant and Nix. I'm just wondering, what are some other options that you evaluated when you were looking at Earthly? Because you're not just building this for yourself, you're building this for Builder, our team, also for our open source projects. So there's a lot of, like, I'd imagine, you know, management issues that are at play. Or not. Maybe you're just doing this solo 100%. And you don't have to answer to anyone.
No,
the dream.
I mean, yeah, unrealistic, but it would be nice, you know, if you didn't have to deal with anything else. No, I mean, you really touched on it there, where there's always going to be competing concerns, or like, you know, it's unfair to say that they're like soft concerns, as people that are maybe spend a little bit more time directly on the keyboard would be key to phrase it as. But there are concerns that exist beyond myself, right? It's not just me who is very comfortable with command line utilities, or like that runs Linux, and one of the two people at Builder that I think that has a Linux operating system. And we have a lot of other priorities. Again, of course, with the open source side of things, there's a huge number of people that could potentially be using this. So a couple of the other tools that were under evaluation is Bazel, which we used, Bazel or Basil, however you want to phrase it. We have in places in a few different places. And then Nix is another tool that I've come across that, of course, has been very popular in recent years. And then there's the route of go with Docker and build your own shell scripts and that whole thing. Beyond that, I mean, there's a couple other like bespoke things that you could do. But those are kind of the main tools that I've come across lately, or at least have a lot of support. So as far as like Bazel goes, I think Bazel is very interesting and has a lot of opportunities to be a very valuable addition to an organization. My evaluation of Bazel is that it requires a lot of effort to administer and to run properly. So it totally makes sense for an organization like Google to have a tool like Bazel, where you have thousands of developers and you need a very homogeneous process for producing outputs, especially if you have all of your code checked into a single repository and everything is interdependent, as I've been told. If you make a change in one place within Google's organization and it's a breaking change, you need to update everything that is being impacted by that. So it totally makes sense, given that environment. My biggest gripes with Bazel is that it wants to do everything. So there's not much of a middle ground with Bazel. It's either all or nothing. For projects like Node, where for better or for worse, the build system and the tool chain is not consistent, and every tool has a different way of doing things, and things break very frequently. It is very challenging to standardize around a certain set of processes to have a repeatable process that does not change week to week, day to day, year to year. With tools like Bazel, the way that I have seen it, the way that they get around that is they just own the entire build process. From what I saw when we were using it, you have a duplication of effort where, as I mentioned before, with Earthly, there's the opportunity where not everyone has to use it if they don't want to. Maybe that will change once we get to an organization of a certain size and we just need to standardize around a certain set of processes. But there's the opportunity where, assuming you follow the steps that are outlined in it, and really the Earth file or the Docker file is really nice in that regard, in that it gives you a set of reproducible steps. Even if you're not doing it inside of a Docker container, if you're running on Linux or something similar, follow these steps, you'll probably get the same result. With Bazel, there's no real analog to what you would do on a local system to get it to run properly. It is going to replace your manifest file, your package JSON. You have to specify all the dependencies through there. You need to outline all the steps for whatever tool is involved in your tool chain. If you're running this through TypeScript, you need to use a separate wrapper that's provided by Bazel, and passing the options into there. There's this additional layer of abstraction that exists across all of your tools. And it's great when it works, but the moment that it no longer works, you are out of luck entirely. Because it's like, I hope someone on your team, I hope you have like 30 people to administer Bazel and make the changes to the tens of thousands of Starlark DSL code to get this to work properly. And if you're using a tool that Google's not interested in using, then good luck. Like, it's never going to get merged in. It's not going to get adopted. So for us, kind of the impetus for moving away from it is we wanted to try Yarn workspaces or similar tools, or like NPM workspaces. But if you're using Bazel, you're pretty much tied to the version of Yarn or the version of NPM that they support in their Node.js rules, or like the plugin extension for Bazel for Node. I know that comes with the caveat that you probably wouldn't be using those. You would be using Bazel to replace the sub packages or like in repo dependencies, whatever you want to call it. But
if I kind of interrupt, so I feel like this is a pretty common scenario with oh, Dylan, are you still there? Looks like we've got a lag. I don't know. Oh, okay. I don't know if this lag is going to show up in the final video. We'll find out. But I was just going to say this seems like really common with a lot of tools that I see from big tech that they open source something with good intentions often, but it's so deeply entrenched in their own internal workflows and culture that it's like it's really hard to use and to grow upon. There's definitely tools for like Facebook that are like that too, and you look at it and it's like a technological marvel. Like they did an amazing job. It can have great performance and all that, but if you're a small team like we are at Builder, then yeah, it can get really difficult to maintain and interact with.
Yeah, exactly. Again, it totally makes sense. If you have 3,000 people, you can probably afford to have 30 or 100 people work full time on administering those build tools. But I mean, it's
Yeah.
really challenging as a single person to try and keep up with that. And
Well,
it's just a whole separate set of skills, right?
yes, absolutely. I mean, build engineering is like its own discipline, its own art and science. So, we're running up on time, I think. I just want to kind of ask, like, are there any other open source projects that you're really excited about? And I also want to ask you, is there anything that you've learned recently that you find interesting on any topic at all? Doesn't have to be engineering, that you'd like to share with the world?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we can go in reverse order because we can probably just, go on forever about like random technology projects.
Sure.
But I mean, more than anything, it's not anything new, but it just, as we talk about the needs beyond an individual and trying to assess like what choices make sense for a group or for an organization, it just seems more and more apparent that like my attitude these days is just that like code in general doesn't really matter. Perfect abstractions around things don't really matter, especially if code is going to get thrown out in 2 weeks. So it's just it really the connections and working with people and being able to functionally exist within a team is far more important and will make anyone far more productive than any amount of technical proficiency will ever. Yeah,
I agree.
that's
Definitely.
for sure. But I mean, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to ask, to that effect, are there any other projects that maybe people want to check out that help increase that collaboration?
It's a great question. I don't know. I feel like technology can kind of get in the way of people. So I think probably what I would suggest is maybe the opposite of like maybe just try and reach out to your peers, to your coworkers, try to appeal to our human nature. We're all we're all people. Sometimes it's best just to not try and shortcut it with technology.
I'm going to throw that up on the screen. We're all people. No shortcuts.
Yeah. I mean, I've been in a lot of organizations.
Yeah,
exactly. Perfect. I've been in a lot of organizations, and especially with a lot of developers, I think we all have this desire of trying to, we see like an inefficient process, especially when it's organized around people, and a gut reaction for a lot of people is like, what tool will make this better? And maybe the answer is not, maybe the answer is not technology, and it's just being a little bit more compassionate.
Yes, absolutely. And part of that answer, I think, is realizing that not everything requires a fix, that, we should become much more process oriented, to use a software development, term, just like our relationships with people and our relationships with the products that they build are an ongoing relationship. It is a relationship. It's not a one and done thing. That you just set up the build process and you walk away.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree. Yeah. People are not a problem to be solved.
I love this. Well, we could probably talk about that and the philosophy of life forever. I'm going to leave it on that note. Thank you for joining us today, Dylan.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's our first episode of Builder Chats. And my name is Ajsen Alkunja. I'm a developer advocate at Builder. Thanks so much for joining us, and tune in for next time. Until then.